60 is the new 50, or so they tell us. For some, getting older means getting used to new aches and pains and limitations. For others, it's a time of freedom and an opportunity to try new things. For author and Globe and Mail feature writer Ian Brown, it was a bit of both. For an entire year, between ages 60 and 61, he kept a painstaking account of all of his changes, and he's here now to tell us about what he noticed about the delightful process of getting older. Welcome to your studio, if I can put it that way.
Yes, it's a familiar place.
This is where you do your thing. Well, you mentioned TV a couple times in the book, so good for you.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you find it a delightful process of turning 60.
Well, I think it's delightful because I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
But now,
There you go.
But now that I see what the future holds, I'm taking a much more mixed approach to the whole thing.
Oh, yeah?
Why did you want to do this? Chronicle that 60th year of your life.
I found that at 55, things started to change a little bit. I began to notice, my knees didn't work quite as well as I wanted, and I want them to work for a long time. I have big plans for my knees. I was going through the usual memory challenges, opening the cupboard to get the coffee, or opening, say, the freezer to get the coffee, when in fact the coffee is in a cupboard, but it's at the same height, it's the same motion. You sort of remember things by category as opposed to by detail. And as I got closer to 60, I had one of two reactions in the morning when I woke up. Either I would think, as Harold Pinter said, to hell with death. Every day Pinter said, he woke up and said, to hell with death, death. And he had that way of sticking his tongue out when he said it. And Pinter also said, there's two ways of approaching this. Either you say to hell with death, or you are a puling wiener of doubt, and you're shivering on the floor and defeated by the oncoming prospect of getting older and dying. And I found that I did one or the other. But I did both, and I couldn't figure out why I did one or the other, and I couldn't figure out whether I needed to do only one. If you read poetry and philosophy, Larkin, everybody, death is coming. Mm-hmm. Death is right around the corner. Death is lurking over you. Whereas if you read the self-help stuff, it's younger next year, it's sexy, it's 60, and that did not seem too convincing.
You're not experiencing that part too much either.
No, so I thought if I kept a record, a chronicle, day by day for a year, maybe I could identify, why I felt one way and the other way, and maybe I could notice the details of time rushing past.
You do a very human thing, which is to sort of Google people who are the same age as you and then compare yourself to how they're. So who's also 60, and how are you comparing to them?
Christy Brinkley is 60, and she's...
Okay, pal, she's got you beat, I'm sorry to say. She still looks fantastic. You look okay, but she looks fantastic.
No, she looks fantastic. Yeah. That's absolutely true. Renee Russo, is she the actress? Yeah. Renee Russo.
She also looks great.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. Oprah is 60, who is very rich and very powerful, which you would think would be daunting. Yeah. But at the same time, they're also 60. So they're as close to the end as I am. And weirdly, and I'm not the kind of person who, goes seeking solace on the internet all that much, but weirdly, finding out that Oprah, despite her wealth and despite her power, despite her many charms, Oprah is as close to the quietus as I am, that's okay.
You actually don't know that, though, right? I mean, it is possible that you could live to 100 as your dad did.
Yeah.
Or, Oprah gets hit by a bus tomorrow. You don't know how much time you got left, right?
Right, and that's one of the problems. It's a completely unpredictable, thing. And it's interesting. If you ask somebody who's 25 or 30, what will you be like when you're 60? Like, describe yourself at 60, and they describe a being who's out of Isaac Asimov. I mean, just a complete alien, somebody who's, another being. In other words, not themselves, and that being. I became obsessed with physical decay at one point, and I started reading about physical decay. And once you start reading, your brain expands to about 28, gets more complex till about the age of 28. And at 28, it says, okay, that's enough. We're going backwards now. And it starts to go backwards. Your skin starts to decay at 35. By 39, your bones are, riddled with doubt and possible weakness.
Stop making it sound so wonderful, okay? Well, actually, here's a quote. Can I read a quote from the book here? A 20-year-old thinking of him or herself as an old person is imagining another being entirely, someone they are not. But they are also that person. That doubleness is how age manages to grab us by surprise. As I get older, you write, my body, this old pal I have relied on for so long, is less capable of acting in the outside world. And so the real world, the truer world, becomes the world inside me. It's a pretty profound change. So much to unpack here, but let's start with this. One of the things I found kind of incongruous about this book is I've known you, 20, 25 years. Yeah. And the you I think of when I think of you is a younger, kind of studly, very virile, flirtatious. I mean, you know who I'm talking about here, right? This is, and certainly was, you to a great extent. I don't think, I'm trying to see now. Have you got the hearing aids in?
I do, yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
I don't think of a guy, and you go on at length in this in the book, as the guy who now needs to wear hearing aids.
Right.
Do you have trouble recognizing yourself at 60?
Yes, and I'm in constant denial of the fact that I am 60. I was walking just the other day on the street and noticed a guy who had silver hair and a bit more of a pot belly than I have, and I thought, oh, look at that poor guy. He's 10 years closer to the end than I am. Now, that's great. And then I looked again and I realized he was 40 years old. So I'm constantly denying that, that inner person I was talking about, that older person is there, even now that I'm getting older. And, I think you have to do that for evolutionary reasons. You don't want to admit that, and you do feel. I mean, half the time I feel 25, and I'm talking to my 25-year-old friends at work, and then I realize I'm 35, is that right? Yeah, 35 years.
Beyond that.
I'm 35 years beyond that. And how can we be talking as equals? And that's the problem, is breaking through to not comparing yourself to others, not allowing the commercial pressure, to always think that you're supposed to be younger, you're supposed to be older. The difficulty is getting to who you actually are.
Can I ask you about a friend of yours?
Sure.
How's George?
George is okay. George is now, he's not retired, but he's resting.
Want to explain who George is?
Yeah, I know this could be the biggest single mistake I've ever made in my life. George was one of the physical changes was George is a hemorrhoid.
You named your hemorrhoid.
Well, I felt it was the only possible thing I could do. Yeah, no,
And George is still with us.
Well, George is never going away. Oh. This is the thing. George never leaves. And all the Georges never leave, or the Georginas. They never leave either.
Now, the fact that you just said this may be the biggest mistake I ever make suggests that even you think maybe you've been too self-revealing on this one. Yeah?
Yeah. A little, it's not a confession, it's a candor. And a little candor goes a long way.
How about a little discretion? How far does that go?
I admit, but it's a diary, so I have to put something on the line, and I have to have something at stake, and I'm afraid George was one of them.
All right, for those who do think 60 is the new 50, what do you say to them?
I think it's entirely individualistic.
Does it feel that way for you?
Some days, absolutely. Some days when I walked into the bathroom at the work, went into the stall, secured the door, and proceeded to unbutton my shirt, it did not feel like, I was 50, because I wasn't doing that at 50. But at the same time, at 50, I was much more concerned with what I was supposed to think and what others wanted me to think and what I thought I should think, as opposed to what I actually found interesting. I do think freedom can come with age if you allow yourself.
Have you talked to your Globe and Mail pal Peggy Wente about this?
Yes.
She did do a piece the other day on it, and I want to read a little excerpt and get you to react to that. Because she says, don't call me a senior. I had always thought that turning 65 would be a sort of reverse Cinderella moment, when youth and love and work would all be snatched away and I would turn into a miserable, wizened crone. Instead, there was a sort of liberation. For the first time in my life, I felt that I could, within reason, do exactly what I wanted. And what I wanted was pretty much what I already had, except for the youth part. Work, love, friends, good books to read, and woods to walk in. Not much changed, except in good ways. She sounds like she's enjoying her 60s way more than you are. Is that true?
No, I'm not enjoying my 60s. I mean, look. There's two kinds of reactions to this book. One is, great, I'm glad, one can find some liberation. The other is, what the hell are you doing talking about that? It's an extension of the George argument or of Peggy's argument, which is, I only want you to see the good side. Because there is something that happens in the aging brain. Because your brain starts compensating, at a younger age, it can do one thing with one part of the brain. Later on, it needs 2 or 3 parts. The compensating brain seems to become more optimistic. It only sees the positive side of things. There's a lot of this, I don't want to be talking about this, I'd rather be in denial of it. Let's only see the good side. I'm sorry, there are great things about it, and there are dark things about it.
Let me follow up on the dark. You've talked about how the knees aren't what they used to be and some of the physical infirmities that come with being 60. Aside from the physical things, what do you regret about now being 60?
I regret that I don't have time to write a Broadway musical or a...
What do you mean you don't? Of course you do.
I do?
Well, why wouldn't you?
Well, I have my job to do. I have my, family to tend to. I have books that I, want to write.
Prioritize, young man. Come on.
Well, yeah, okay. Absolutely, one should prioritize. But the fact is, there's less time left than there was when I was 20.
So how do you intend to make up for the, if not lost time, then not enough time to do all the stuff you still want to do?
I found my tendency was to speed up. So, I want to read War and Peace and Moby Dick and, Paradise Lost again, and write the HBO series, and et cetera, et cetera. So what you do is you try and cram everything in, and you skip over details. But skipping over details is a terrible thing to do, because details are the building blocks of future memory, but they are also what make, the story in every case. Paradoxically, what you have to do is slow down and pay attention to a few details. So, if I'm going to write about getting older, maybe I should really concentrate on 4 or 5 scenes of getting older and turn that into a Broadway musical.
It could be about your life. After reading the book, I thought to myself, this is easily a one-person show if you wanted it to be. Yeah. Or you could really spin it into something else. Yeah. It's there.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. You have to drop down into what actually grabs you, as opposed to what's supposed to grab you, and pay attention to that.
Can I ask you about, well, I am going to ask you, and since you talk about her in the book, we're going to talk about your wonderful wife of 25 years, whom you've known for 30.
Johanna, yes.
You are so candid about a lot of your relationship with her in this book. Now, admittedly, you drew the line about your sex life.
Yeah.
You don't talk about that too much. You did make a reference to it.
I do?
Yeah, you do.
What do I say?
There was one point late in the book where you did sort of, the two of you got into bed together, and there was this inquiry, you want to have sex tonight, and she's too tired, or she just had a long day traveling, and so instead the two of you just decide to read for an hour, and then you're out like a light after that.
Right.
So you did put that in the book on the record.
Right.
Did she read the book before you sent it to the publisher?
Oh, of course.
She did?
Yeah.
And she let you keep all that stuff in there?
She did. She objected only to 2 little passages where she thought I had not been sufficiently...
discreet?
No, not discreet, complex.
Huh.
She thought the reaction, or my reaction, or her reaction, I can't remember which now, it was one of each, was insufficiently complete. She thought it was not subtle enough. It was
okay, that's an editor's note. That's not a wife's note. Like, I'm wondering, as a wife, if she at any point ever said to you, Ian, for goodness sakes, do you have to splay our whole bloody private life over the pages of this book?
I think she would argue that I don't display. I mean, look, what are we comparing this to? Look at the standard, and in your business, in television, look at the standard. I mean, look what Kanye, and who's Kanye married to?
Some Kardashian.
Yeah, some Kardashian. Yeah. I mean, look what they do.
Yeah, but that's them.
Single day of their lives.
They're American stars. You're a serious Canadian feature writer, author, journalist.
That's right.
It's
And
different.
And I think a little candor is a good thing.
A little?
Yeah, a little candor.
There's a lot in here.
I don't know about that. I think it's a little candor well managed, and that it seems like more candor than. But it's important candor, because if you can't talk about getting older, then you fall back upon, I don't know what you're talking about, smarten up, or you fall back on everything's great, or you fall back on everything's dreary, and you don't have a real conversation about it. It's like, you having a political conversation. If it's either, it's only the Tories or only the Liberals or only the NDP, there's no nuance in there at all. Nuance is important. Nuance is what makes getting older bearable.
And I don't misunderstand. I don't mean to be negative about it. I'm thrilled you did it, because I'm not that far behind you, frankly. And
better me than you.
Well, I was going to say that. I love the insights. I love the sort of, so this is what I've got to get ready for. So I really appreciated that. But I did read the stuff, and coincidentally enough, you and I share the same wedding anniversary. Right. And I just remember thinking, if I ever wrote this stuff about my situation, my wife would have a heart attack. She'd want to kill me. And I'm amazed that your wife, 8 years your junior, as you remind us all the time, apparently, apparently doesn't want to kill you for writing this stuff.
No, and we're both still married, right?
Well, yeah, you are, but do you want to get into this a little bit? I mean, there's a lot of passages in this book where you say, yeah, we're still married, and I like the familiarity of it, and I like the fact that we're going to get old together and all that, but, how bad would it be if we weren't married anymore? I mean, you do a lot of thinking out loud about stuff that we're supposed to only think about in our very private, quiet moments.
But we do think about it.
We do, yeah.
Right.
How do you get away with doing that, though?
I think Montaigne said, you must write what is inside you. You must bring it outside. If you don't bring it outside, it stays inside, and it either festers, or somebody else says it.
Well, good for you, and good for her for sort of indulging in you in that way.
She's a writer. So, she understands that the material of your life, pops out, all over the place. I mean, my hero, Philip Roth, he was constantly doing this. He got married. He then got divorced from Claire Bloom. Claire Bloom wrote an entire book on the subject.
Yeah, but you're not a neurotic Jew from Cleveland or wherever he's from. I mean, it's a different story.
I'm a neurotic Anglo from Point Claire.
There you go.
It's almost the same thing.
Okay, good enough. Let me ask, we talked about your dad earlier. Your dad lived to 100 and...
No, he lived to 99.
99, okay. What did you learn watching his experience with aging?
I learned that you have to forgive yourself. He said to me at the end of his life, and he had a very modern life. The old way was, it's a bell curve, right? You get up to middle age, and then it's a slow and fairly painful decline to the end. Mm-hmm. Whereas he rectangularized his life graph. So he, at least from your point of view, he's up, along, and then at the very end, a sharp, precipitous decline. So in 6 months, he went from going to work and exercising every day to, oxygen and to dying.
He was going to work at 98.
Yeah, three times a week. Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, well, he loved his work. I mean,
which was what?
He was a scrap metal broker. He bought and sold scrap metal, and he loved to predict the price of copper and stuff like that. He said at the very end, when he was, apologizing when we would go into a restaurant and I would have to move the table so he could get in, or we'd have to move his wheelchair. He said, don't get old. Don't get old. I think what he was saying is, you are going to get old, like me. And if you can forgive me for being this way, because he hated being, as he said, not useful anymore, not being of any value. I think he was saying, if you can forgive me for being this old, for being this apparently decrepit and useless, which he was not. I mean, he was my companion. He was a great boon to me. We got together in these amorphous situations, and you've got to make something happen. You can't, quote, do something. You've got to feel it into being. And that creates empathy. That creates imaginative human connection, which is the kind of thing you remember and that deepens you. I think he was saying, when he said, "Don't get old." He was saying, you are going to get old. If you can forgive me, you can forgive yourself.
Do you want to live to be 99 in the way that he did?
Yes, I would love to get to be. I would love to be compos mentis. I mean, you know, and I'm so lucky to have my body intact, and so far, at least, my mind and
most of your hair too.
Yeah, some. I have to say, my bald spot is a reminder. It's like a religious, trinket or something. Every time I see it in the mirror, I think, you're getting older. You're getting older. You're getting older. But I really, this great gift, I guess, of health and of presence and of a desire to be involved still. I do hope that I can get to his age, and if it has to, and as Philip Larkin said, most things don't happen, but that one will. When the end comes, for it to be short and sharp.
You've mentioned Philip Larkin a couple of times in this discussion, and you mention him in the book a lot. And let me read something.
He is the brilliant poet of age.
Well, here, you quote Old Fools, his poem, and then here's what you wrote in your book. Aging is a group exercise. The prospect already gives me pause. That funny look my father leveled at me as he said, "Don't get old, Will." But really saying in his kind way, "You will get old, you'll see. I can't help this, and neither can you." I wonder if it gave him any satisfaction to know that he wasn't alone, that I was headed there too, that I would eventually understand. What do you think? You think it did give him satisfaction?
I think so. We used to get together in his room, and he couldn't move so far, and he hated, going to the bathroom, as he said, was like organizing the invasion of D-Day single-handedly. It was very complex. But I think just sitting there and figuring out how we were going to be together if we could not go and play squash or go for a run or go skiing or do the garden or plant the tomatoes or, and he was a guy who loved physical activity.
But you've got to figure out a different non-physical agenda at this point, don't you?
You have to figure out an emotional agenda, and you've got to figure out who's doing what for whom and whether it matters.
Now, that's your dad. Your mom's senior years were not as much fun. And I wonder if you had to live to 99, but it was more your mother's experience as opposed to your father's, would you be okay with that? She
was physically okay until she was 90 I guess she was 95. She was physically okay until she was 95. It's complex. I mean, she was one of that generation of women who came between the two waves of feminism, right? She was too young to be a suffragette, born in 1915, 1916. Too old and too burdened with a family to be a second wave, Gloria Steinem era feminist. With all the, uneducated because of the Depression, had to go, leave and go to work. But with all the intelligence and wit and drive of, she should have been running a major arms company. I mean, she had the right personality for that. But, and so took it out both in and on her family.
You?
Yeah, lots of us. And her life was filled with regret. She regretted nearly everything that, she thought she could have done it better. She never managed to somehow free herself from whatever it is that creates those regrets. And I think what creates the regrets is our own belief in what the outside world tells us is important.
But this is what I mean. So if you had to live to 99 in the way that she did, I'm not sure you're signing on for that.
No, I don't think so. Yeah. But I don't think I will. This is one of the, I hope, and please forgive me for talking about George and all the other stuff. I know it's a little embarrassing at times, but I hope that is one of, in a very, very tiny way, that's one of my contribution, is that with more candor, maybe we don't have to regret as much, because regret is fundamentally a secret thing. It's something you carry inside yourself forever, and it festers there. If you can be candid, you might not have to be so regretful.
Well, let's finish on this because I have to tell you, I did love the book. I thought it was fantastic, and yes, you've definitely peeled back the curtain.
I hope you're reading it to one another at night, you and your wife, sitting in bed. You know.
Well, after this interview's over, I'm actually going to ask you to sign this copy to her.
Oh, great!
Because I've read it, and I want her to read it, and then get ready for what 5 years down the road's going to look like. But I did at one point get to the end of the book and think to myself, God, poor Ian. Is he ever capable of just chilling, or is everything kind of existential and cataclysmic and heavy? And I mean, do you ever can you just chill at times, Ian?
Oh yeah,
you can.
No. My problem is that I can chill so well that I barely exist.
I don't believe that, but anyway, congratulations. It really was a fantastic read.
Well, thanks.
60, the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, a diary of my 61st year. Ian Brown, so good to talk to you here on TV.
Likewise.
Here on TVO.
Likewise.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.